Mayor Van Ness.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Sperry.
Here.
Councilmember Curtis.
Present.
Councilmember Herbig.
Here.
Councilmember Danuski.
Here.
Thank you.
If you'll please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Did you? Figured you were doing something like that. All right. Citizen comments. This is an opportunity for you to express your views that are important to you in the community. And we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Will the clerk please call the first person?
Good evening. I'm Bill Leiter. I'm a professional civil engineer, and I've worked in stormwater for 30, 35 years in Western Washington. I kind of grew up with the stormwater manuals from the 1992 to the 2001, 2005, 2010, 2012, whatever manuals. And I became aware, or I was notified the day before the comment period closed on the MD&S decision on the Beaumark development project at Payne Field, which is contributes water to Swamp Creek and also contributes to, at the headwaters, to the flooding problems in Kenmore. This project will include a 90,000 square foot office building and the addition of 600 parking stalls, quite a bit of impervious pavement. I learned about it the day before the comments closed, which also runs concurrent with the appeal process. So I thought I was doing good just to get comments in 24 hours. And unfortunately, there wasn't a time to notify or organize an appeal of that MD&S decision. I was able to notify Chris Oversley and the city of Kenmore about it, and to the big benefit of the city, Kenmore also filed comments for what they're worth with Snohomish County. The rules for this stormwater that they want to design are using the 1992 stormwater manual, which is obsolete and it's been discredited, and it actually has been shown to do more harm to streams than good. That's why Ecology changed the methods for doing stormwater design in 2001. The county claims that this project is vested under the 1992 stormwater manual because of a binding site plan that was last amended in 2001, 15 years ago, roughly. The county also has rules about how the manuals are used and what they call cherry picking, that you have to use the manual, you have to use one manual. You can't use part of one manual and part of another. Yet that's exactly what they're doing here. They also have to explicitly show on the binding site plan the development that they're proposing, which was not done 15 years ago on their plan. So the county has some significant errors in this project that would certainly be appealable. Unfortunately, by the time I learned about it, and plus come up with the $500 to start the appeal process with the county, there just was not time to do that. The city of Kenmore, however, does have the ability under the WACs, and I've forwarded that to your staff, the actual citation, that the county is supposed to notify so many words, the downstream recipients of their project of the impact, so that the city has an opportunity to comment and or appeal, and I do not believe that that was done. And that's something that your staff and your city attorney will have to review to decide if it's worth your while to do that. But there will certainly be more development up at the airport. The county, I was up at the county council's office today and talked before the county council at a similar hearing like this, and the county is receiving are looking to issue a tenant contract to develop passenger terminals at Payne Field, which is quite controversial in its own right. But the county does not want to go back and redesign their stormwater so that it meets the current codes. They want to use a regional detention pond in that area. So I'm not opposed to the airport development, but I am opposed to using an inferior stormwater manual that can cause more harm in sizing, erosion, and streams than would have occurred had they used the proper stormwater manual. And I would certainly encourage the city of Kenmore to investigate that, and if the opportunity doesn't arise on this project, there'll probably be another project very shortly hereafter where you may want to do an appeal. So with that, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Leiter.
Okay,
Appreciate your taking time out for the comments. This is an issue that the city of Kenmore has had some concerns over for some time with some of the downstream things that we get. So, Mrs. Overlease, our engineer, can you add anything here from Kenmore side, please?
Do we need to?
Oh, there we go. So what Mr. Leiter said is correct. He called me as soon as he found out about this project up there, and Richard jumped on immediately, did some more research, and we were able to get a comment letter in on time. I think at a minimum, Snohomish County has been reminded that we have flooding and sediment issues and that we're watching them. We do not monitor. We don't have the resources to monitor everything Snohomish County does. But we were quite surprised to learn that something of this scale, we weren't on the SEPA notification list. So what Mr. Leiter said is he talked to Richard. Richard is talking to Andrew and Deb on here at the city to see what recourse we have, if any, of not being notified about SEPA. And we will also make sure they know that we need to be on their notification list for all projects that do SEPA in the Swamp Creek watershed. So I think it's a stay tuned from a staff perspective. We'll consult with the city manager's office and our city attorney as needed to see what recourse we have, if any. I'm quite just, we just got done talking to you and saying over time, with the new surface water requirements, things will get better. And here we are observing something that's using the 1992 manual, which is really, really old, and not providing nearly the benefit that the current manual provides.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I would also note, Mr. Leiter and I worked together at Shoreline in the late 90s. So when he contacted
he was telling me.
Yeah, I was like, I know that name.
It was before you were Mrs. Lease.
It was. It was. So that's why you didn't recognize me. I had a new name.
Thank you very much. And as you know, this has been a concern of the council for some time now, was some of the things that, because of differing surface water management requirements. Is there anything we can do to ensure that we're one of the parties that is notified on things like this?
Well, I mean, I have now requested being on their seat notification, but I asked them who they would previously send SEPA notifications to. The project manager I spoke with said they didn't have anything. So I asked them for a SEPA notification.
Really? Interesting. Thank you for doing that. Anybody else wishing to speak?
John Adamski.
Hi, thanks for giving me the time to talk. My name is John Adamski. My family and I have lived in Arrowhead in Kenmore for 46 years, and my wife and I and 3 daughters and 6 grandkids all enjoy swimming and water sports here in the lake very much, and I'm here to focus attention on issues of water quality in Lake Washington. Recently, water samples containing blue-green algae taken from the Kenmore shoreline have tested positive for toxic bacteria. 5 different samples taken from early December last year through this week show microcystin toxin levels that averaged over 20 times the state safe standards for recreational use for humans and for pets. These data have been communicated to Kenmore Public Works, and the Arrows Head site on Lake Washington has been posted with the state ecology toxic warning signs. And I've also seen that Kenmore for a short time had a toxic warning sign on its website. What I wanted to tell you is that issue is persisting. We had a toxic sample last week that was again at over 20 times safe limit. I'm out on the lake quite a bit. I'm a stand-up paddleboarder, and I see algae here and there, and the toxic algae blooms are not just localized. They can be very broad. As a matter of fact, you know, I was out last Friday, and I saw a bloom that was almost all across the lake. And in December, there was the Eyes Over Washington State Department of Ecology and Kenmore Air project took a picture that showed an algae bloom that was over half a mile long along the east shore of Lake Washington. Toxic algae is a very recent problem here for Lake Washington. There are no records of toxicity, at least in the last several years, for the lake here. And it's not a good sign for the health of the lake, not a good sign at all. Toxic algae outbreaks are associated with high nutrition levels, especially of high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen. And these chemicals come from fertilizer, from farm runoff, or they can come from decayed plant matter in the lake or from lake sediment that is stirred up by agitation, for example, by prop wash. Algae growth accelerates at higher temperature, and of course last year was the highest temperature year on record. It might have been like a perfect storm for algae growth and for milfoil growth and for other aquatic weeds. We had very high rainfall in the spring and, of course, that very, very hot summer and a dry fall. Last year, we saw an exceptionally large growth of non-toxic green algae in mats that covered significant portions of the Sammamish River and had large mats on both the north and the south edge of the outfall of the Sammamish River. That you may have seen by now the new issue of Seattle Magazine that shows Kenmore as one of the great affordable suburbs to live in. One of the pictures in there shows some kayakers going up the river, and what you see is something like a 15-foot wide mat of algae right alongside of the kayakers. It's pretty, but it's not good for the lake at all. It's not good for the lake because it blocks sunlight to the area below, and that kills off whatever is trying to grow below that, or whatever is trying to eat something below that. When the algae mats and the milfoil died off in the late fall, the resulting biomass of the decay surely agitated the situation and provided nutrition that could have promoted the toxic algae growth. We haven't seen this toxic algae growth before. We don't know what it's due to. In a waterfront community on Lake Washington, the citizens of Kenmore treasure the lake for its beauty and its value for recreation. Of course you know that. And I believe we have an obligation to do whatever we can to protect and preserve that to a very high standard in water quality. I'd like to ask the Council to consider 3 actions. First, to appoint an individual responsible for water quality issues that include invasive aquatic weeds and algae. Second, to begin an analysis and measurement plan together with King County Ecology to assess the water condition and plant growth that lead to infestations and toxicity. And third, to begin the development of a planning of alternatives for action to manage these nuisances at both the public parks and private properties along Kenmore shoreline to preserve property values. We can do this. I'll be happy to volunteer, and I know that many, many others in our community would too. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Mr. Collins, you city manager, you got that information and can provide us with?
You bet, yeah, we'll be happy to follow up on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Dunsky. We appreciate your coming forward and speaking to us. Anybody else?
No.
So thank you all for taking time out of your schedules. And we certainly will be following up with the city manager on what you had talked about. We need to approve the agenda. If there is no objection, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. And is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And is there a second? I'll second it. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda stands approved unanimously. I will be leaving during the course of the meeting. I'm going to be going down to Olympia to testify as part of AWC's City Action Days, and there's a hearing on the transportation bill tomorrow afternoon. We are coming to understand that there is the $8.5 million in the transportation bill for the West B portion, the unfunded portion, but we're also hearing that there may be an additional $8 million in there for the Sammamish Bridge. So I'm going to go down and certainly talk with our lobbyist and then thank the appropriate people. So in case you get up and wonder why I'm getting up to leave, that's why I'm doing it. So anyway, next item on the agenda is surface water. The draft surface water master plan, Mrs. Overlease, the Public Works Director, and City Engineer Richard Sawyer, Surface Water Management Program Manager. Mrs. Overlease, you wear many hats. I thought you were our Chief Engineer, too.
Yes. Easer load. Did you heard that?
Good evening. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to get through some good reading over the last week.
We were supposed to memorize it, weren't we?
100 and some pages.
Yep. I have a 10-page quiz here, which is the meeting.
Took me 8 hours to read it. So I'm guessing you probably didn't.
So I'm here today. We've provided council with the draft Surface Water Master Plan update. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through it. You've got some questions, comments, any feedback. I'd be happy to take that this evening. If we don't have time to get all your questions, or you have more follow-up you'd like to do, please feel free to email me or Chris, and if any other questions pop up later. And I just kind of reiterate, I know you've heard this a few times, but the master plan is essentially kind of the city's document that describes our surface water programs, our policies, the regulations that guide the development of all of those, and the projects that we design and build in the city for surface water management. It's periodically updated, kind of ranges, 5 to 7 years would be ideal. The first plan was created in 2001. It was updated in 2008. And then this year will be the second update of that original plan in 2015. It supports the comprehensive plan, which we kind of tied into this whole process. You'll recall I was here in November, and we updated the surface water element and the capital facilities element of the surface water capital projects. And then this plan also helps comply with our NPDES Phase 2 stormwater permit by kind of helping describe the programs that we have in place that support that permit. And just very briefly, I kind of showed the process here. We actually came to you in the summer of 2013 when we first introduced the plan update. and then really started diving in last summer. We discussed several policy issues that we received feedback from council. We came in October and discussed some of the capital improvement projects for surface water. As I mentioned, in November, we came in and updated the surface water element of the comprehensive plan. And then just last January, we came and discussed some specific policies and programs with managing Swamp Creek floodplains in Wetland 3. And I just had a few slides before we had questions. There were a few specific issues that we came to council with, and we got your feedback and some comments on a few of those, and I just wanted to briefly go over how we incorporated that feedback and developed a few of these policies. And so the next few slides will just address those, and then I'd be happy to jump into any particular questions you have. I can pull up the plan and we can jump around at that point and take questions. But one of the first policies we discussed was the surface water service charge rate reduction. And if you recall, we had actually come suggesting that some cities have just done away with providing rate adjustments for commercial properties that maintain private drainage facilities. And some have continued with that policy, but they've usually modified or updated those with new technologies. And it was council, the feedback we got from you was that you wanted to continue offering some sort of rate adjustment for these commercial properties that are maintaining their own private drainage facilities. But a few of the options that we heard back from council was to consider the level of service that facility provided. For instance, some of these facilities go back into the late 70s where as you heard earlier, manuals have progressed over time, technologies have changed, surface water management strategies have changed, and so the rate reduction should reflect, what kind of level of service that facility provides the city. Another issue that had come up was our current policy. Really, it was either a parcel was treated by a facility or a parcel wasn't treated by a facility. So, kind of creating a way for managing partially treated parcels on some of our larger commercial and industrial sites so that we can offer some credit for treating portions of these parcels. And then last was just to simplify that rate reduction process. If you recall, currently it's kind of based on these, I won't say go as far as say random, but these, they're not equal steps in what each jump rate reduction you get. So this new policy we created is just steps of 10% increments. So it's just, if you do this, you get this. If you do this much more, you get 20%. This much more, you get 30%. And then I've just got a brief slide here to kind of summarize that. So at the bottom, we tried to incorporate the level of service that the drainage facility provides. So with our facilities that we have right now that we inspect and provide these discounts to, we can relatively easily look at those and say, okay, well, this group is using these older standards before 98. This group uses the next tier of 98 to 2009, et cetera. And then we can provide a 10% up to a 40% discount of the overall surface water charge. And then the scenario I provided on there shows just kind of a sample 10-acre site, and this particular site has a facility treating that lower 3 acres. So you can see that if the site was 70% impervious and they use a 2009 designed standard, then 70% of the site would just be charged at a regular heavy rate. That's the rate that corresponds to a 70% impervious area on the site. And then we would provide that 30% discount for using that 2009 manual on the remaining 3 acres, and then that would provide a resulting lower charge overall. So hopefully that was simplified it somewhat. That is actually simpler than the current method. So were there any questions in particular about how we incorporated your feedback and put this together?
Councilmember Curtis?
I would just comment that I like the solution. I think it captured the heart of what we wanted, and it really, I think, simplified it.
Councilmember Smith?
Do you want question?
Do you want questions just regarding the rate reduction portion or in general of what's provided?
For just these next few slides, I'm just presenting some specific issues. So if just the questions about these issues right now,
that's what I
and
thought.
then when these are done, I open it up to any questions.
I'll hold off.
Anything else on the rate reductions?
Oh, Mayor?
Yeah, Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for making it as simple as possible, or simpler, which is always a miracle in government stuff. One thing I do particularly like is that a person or a property owner can get a greater discount by using the more up-to-date stormwater design and that kind of thing. So I think that's a incentive. You know, I don't know if people would want to update based on this, but at least it moves people in that direction. So thank you.
A second policy I wanted to discuss this evening, if you recall, we came and discussed how the city manages or helps private property owners deal with surface water issues. And we have had kind of in-house administrative policies, how we've approached and deal with questions we get. You know, they are weekly occurrences. People are calling with groundwater issues or flooding problems. And so we came and kind of talked about what we do in-house and received some feedback from council. And I just wanted to highlight a few of those main points. And first and foremost was the council agreed private property drainage issues really are the responsibility of the private property owner. However, at the staff level, we certainly will provide technical guidance, assistance. We have several resources that we can share with private property owners. We know the system very well. We can educate them about what's in the neighborhood, how the drainage around their property is operating. We can always certainly assess and inspect our system to make sure that we're not causing any issue impacting private property. So it's not to say that we just hang up the phone and say sorry, but typically staff, I mean, we will not use our resources. You know, we won't send our crews onto private property and dig up someone's yard and fix you know, a problem that's occurring on their property. But we did, council and staff wanted to leave a door open that, you know, there could always be those cases where it's in the public's best interest to maybe manage particular drainage issues on private property. And so in the plan, I provided kind of a bulleted list that kind of talked about the different criteria that we would look at case by case when we're looking at these drainage issues as they come up. And that was provided in the plan, and so hopefully you had a chance to look at that. And the city attorney's office provided some great feedback on that as well, which didn't really change the substance of it, but, you know, kind of word things a little better. So I've already gotten some good feedback on that section. But I'd be happy to take any other comments or questions that council had regarding the private property drainage management.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Richard. I have a question regarding it's sort of a hybrid of what you just talked about and also the beaver management issue. And it has all these different scenarios about the public right-of-way and the public interest, but what I don't see is where it specifically addresses when it's in the public right-of-way or it's a public responsibility and how it impacts private property. And I'm just wondering if you can shed any light on that. And then sort of, and I'll give you one example that's coming to mind in this, and it has to do with the recent beaver removal in the Inglewood wetlands area, where the water was coming up to a point that it was actually potentially going to compromise the private road going in there. And so I know the city trapped the beavers and removed them, but I'm just trying to understand where the public and private line is, and if you could shed any light on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, that was a good example of both the beaver management policy that's also in the plan, and the private drainage issue. So the city actually owns that property that the beaver activity occurred on, so that the Inglewood Wetlands is actually a series of 2 or 3 city-owned properties along the shores of Lake Washington. And in that particular case, really the only reason the city became involved was because we owned the property and something was happening on city-owned property that was impacting and causing a potential hazard to neighboring private property owners. We've also had the case where beaver activity has occurred on private property and it was threatening to impact the public right-of-way, and we have approached that private property owner and required them to conduct activities in order to deal with that beaver and remove the issue. So it really, it's almost as simple as it just boils down to, where the issue occurs. Is it on a city-owned right-of-way or property, or is it on privately owned property?
So is it fair to assume then, in general, if we know that there was, and I'll use beaver activity because everybody understands what kind of damage they can create as well as the good they provide, but there's clearly some damage that goes along with it. If the damage impacts private property, is that something then that the city will always address?
You mean an activity occurring on city-owned
public property, and it could be in one of our parks or something, and somehow it's having a negative impact on an adjacent private property owner in some ways, and I use the private road, because that's the most obvious one that I could think of. But I just want to understand where our liability and responsibility starts and ends, and I'm not sure I totally do get it yet.
And I think it's difficult to really make that black and white.
Okay.
For instance, in the same example there with the Inglewood Wetlands, the road was being impacted, and that was, I think, everyone would agree that would be a hazard to the public and needed to be addressed. But, it was interesting when I was talking to one of the homeowners there, they would, their idea of, creating a hazard was if the beaver was there at all, or potentially harming trees or changing vegetation in the wetland. And that's where I think, you might start getting a difference of opinion. If the road's safe, people's homes are safe, but the beaver activity is just moving the stream around, maybe a tree's falling down here, new vegetation's moving around, we might not necessarily consider that a hazardous situation that we would need to intervene, because that's just, the beaver is doing what it's meant to do.
Okay, great. Thanks, I appreciate it.
I think when we get complaints about surface water, it kind of does have a system. We're not all places at all times, so a lot of things we learn about when people do call us and let us know. Richard and Art, as surface water technician, always go out. If we get a concern or a complaint, they'll go out and they'll investigate. They'll meet with property owners. They'll talk to them on the phone. So the first step is always going out and seeing what's going on. Sometimes it's real clear that the issue isn't coming from either property we own, and so it goes to the break in the chart, and so Richard will provide technical assistance if it's private property based. If it could be that there's something going on in the right-of-way, an undersized catch basin, a broken pipe, he will bring engineering in then as needed to look and maybe do a study or an evaluation to see if our own infrastructure needs some work. So it's never a straight path. It's always investigating each one individually. We get quite a few calls for trees on our property too that might look like they're not in great shape. The first step is always, where's the tree, who owns it, and working with a property owner to discuss solutions. So I agree with Richard, there's no pat answer for every single one, but they always start with a conversation and an investigation to see, our goal is to help regardless, whether it's technical assistance or doing something on the city's behalf.
Great. Well, thank you. And I know that the homeowners appreciated the work that was done by the city in addressing what was potentially a problem with the road. So thank you.
Councilmember Danuski.
I just want to say I like this section, and I think it'll probably help us in the future with homeowners and what they, having the expectations written down is always a good thing. So thanks.
Any other
And-
questions?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Were there any other questions regarding the private property drainage? Great. So the plan, you were provided the full capital improvement program, all the project sheets for the different projects that were evaluated and created during the plan update process. I know that during the comprehensive plan update, you had a chance to see several of those projects and ask questions. During the budget process, I believe you got to see in more detail some of the near-term plan projects that we have budgeted. But I just kind of wanted to open up if there were any more particular questions now that you kind of saw the whole full suite of projects that were developed, provided with the plan. Nope. And then I've already kind of touched on this, obviously the surface water element update. And then last was in January we came and spoke with council about Swamp Creek. And we kind of, we showed a kind of abbreviated version of that full section, I believe, I forget the appendix, but that kind of discussed in detail everything that we went through that evening, which kind of boiled down to, in 2005, the improvements that the city conducted will continue to hold up to 100-year storm events in terms of flooding of 73rd and the bridge, so those will be okay. Private properties in the floodplain are going to continue to be impacted by Swamp Creek, and then dredging and high-flow bypass options were explored, and we presented the updated hydrologic model to council, showing that it was didn't provide any real benefit to the road or to the private properties, and they were also very expensive and economically infeasible. But we did continue, habitat improvements will continue to be pursued and encouraged in Wetland 3 and the Swamp Creek floodplains. So now that you kind of had the whole report there and the plan, were there any additional questions or comments that coming from that?
Councilmember Smith?
Question regarding the gentleman that spoke earlier this evening about the Swamp Creek drainage and basin and notification in SEPA. And I don't know how they determine who is notified, but when we know now that we weren't notified on that project, is there anything we can do proactively to make sure that on other projects, whether that are in that basin, which could fall under multiple jurisdictions, that we need to maybe at least make sure that we're on their notification list? Or I don't know how that notification works, but it seems like a pretty significant thing that we didn't get notified. Can you tell us what we can do? And then not just Swamp Creek, but maybe even like 0056 or whatever, that comes out of Lake Forest Park and Briar area. Maybe there's other areas that we don't know that we're not being notified.
Yes, and one of the first things I did do, speaking with the lead agency for that project, was to ask to be put on that SEPA notification list. And as I mentioned, I asked who was receiving SEPA notifications at the city of Kenmore, and I was as surprised also to hear that they didn't have anyone on that list. And since Bill's brought this to our attention, I have been reading through their code and the state regulations, and unfortunately Debbie's not here today. She's been kind of chatting with her. She's a good resource. So I don't know the exact answer on whether any rules were broken by not notifying the city of Kenmore. There's very gray language in there. I did notice Snohomish County has a specific policy. They'll notify jurisdictions within 1 mile of a project, which we're outside of, but then they're required to notify jurisdictions that whose services may be impacted by the project. So then we start getting into, and that's what I've kind of passed on to our planning department is, what does that mean? Are we clearly a jurisdiction whose services are impacted by this project, and should we have been notified? So those are the kinds of the nitty-gritty questions that we're looking into right now.
So kind of on that, I mean, I look at that and I look at like Alderwood Mall area and that greater area where there's a lot of different type of development going on, and a lot of that feeds into the Swamp Creek drainage basin. Since that is sort of the root of a lot of the evil that we have to deal with at this end of the river, how are we assured that we are notified on these projects, or do they even have a legal requirement to notify us on significant projects? I don't understand the threshold and how they determine who is notified.
And that's something that we're researching and looking into, and as a result, hopefully we can just put ourselves on those notification lists, because I know that's also one of the, if there's any party has just said, I'd like to be notified, then that's one of the groups of people that will then need to be notified.
Okay, thank you.
And what I'm concerned about is these old projects that I'm fine if the city of Linwood or unincorporated Snohomish County wants to vest projects to their requirements, but I don't understand how they can vest projects to the 92 surface water manual. It really does boggle my mind, and so I think that's a question that Richard and I have too, and are talking to our team, is how can they legitimately, if they're a NPDES permit holder, how can they use such an outdated manual? So those are great questions, and we're trying to understand. Richard and I talked to surface water people at these agencies, and what we're realizing is talking to the surface water people who know we're flooding and have issues, that doesn't necessarily translate into their planning folks and the people that are issuing permits. So I think at a minimum, kind of a consistent effort with all of our watershed partners, making sure we're on their SEPA notification lists and demonstrating to them that we do have issues, and when surface water flows increase, so does sediment, which changes our operations. I'm thinking of the dredging that we do. So I think we can make a nexus between their behavior and our practices, but we need to get on their lists.
Anybody else? I know we had some issues at one time with Briar, and we seemed to got those resolved. It seems like these issues, especially with the Swamp Creek Basin, have been going on for a number of years. And I was really very surprised to hear that we weren't on their SEPA notification list, because we're their downstream neighbor. We touch Snohomish County. So I guess I find that frustrating, and I really appreciate your making sure we're on it in the future. But is there anything else we can do to get their attention?
Well, when
dumping
these
on us and we're getting kind of tired of it.
When these projects come along and we learn, in this particular one using such outdated and ineffective stormwater standards, that's what the SEPA process is for, is to have that ability to appeal the project and lay down the case for why we think, regardless of what standard they're using, even if they're meeting their own codes, the SEPA process allows you to make a case that, well, it's still not enough and we're still having these problems, and then the project would ideally have to address those.
Right, but I mean, we're a municipality, and we still have deadlines that we have to comply with. Otherwise, our hands are tied. We've got to keep our mouth shut. So, if they don't let us know, that clock still runs. I mean, it's not their fault that they didn't let us know, and it's not our fault that they didn't let us know. I mean, the same thing we had with Briar, right?
It could be their fault that they didn't let us know.
Well, they may have an obligation to, but I don't think state law mandates that they let us know.
Well, I don't think we've come to that conclusion yet. So I think for this development specifically, we're still evaluating whether we have any leg to stand on as far as SEPA notice and not getting it, and what would it take to challenge the process. But at a minimum, they now know that we're watching them. Richard's been talking to their staff, and we need to get on their notification lists. But it's not just Snohomish County, it's making sure we're on Linwoods and Briars. Everybody's.
Yeah, because I mean, we went to them with the NEPA 2 project, right?
Pardon?
Didn't we go to them with didn't the counties have to come up with some project for part of NEPA 2?
That was NPDES.
NPDES,
their
yeah.
update. And
So, we went to them and they said no.
we asked them to pick Swamp Creek, and they're at a staff level said they would prefer to do Little Bear Creek and Woodinville. But do we know yet what ecology is letting them do?
Well, they had selected that watershed and moved forward with that. I don't know the current status, but that's what Snohomish County was pushing forward with. But that was a case where whenever we see an opportunity that will kind of force upstream coordination, we try and jump on it.
Richard and I actually made a trip up to Snohomish County at their offices to press them to choose Swamp Creek instead. And
So we're trying to be in front of them. We're trying to let them know.
well, our best hope is to get them to notice us because we don't have the resources to be monitoring all their stuff.
Exactly.
So,
Councilmember Curtis.
back when Fred Statter was the city manager, we had a meeting with everybody who was Swamp Creek related. And that wasn't more than, seems like 4 or 5 years ago.
4 years ago, so yeah.
So it doesn't seem like they should have forgotten that we're down here.
And we're actually working with the Snow King Watershed Council that Mr. Leiter is on, correct?
Yeah, I'm on the board.
And we've been working with Eric Admin, and he's been asking Richard and me what we think about having another Swamp Creek Watershed Forum with partners in the community, and so that's in the talks as well. I think it's time for another reminder that we're here and we have problems.
I know there was a bill floating around the legislature about making sure that downstream communities were notified of things going in, and I don't think it got very far as part of SEPA, but maybe it's time to approach this from a state level. So, Mr. Leiter, I know you've got something to add to this, but keep it brief, please.
If I may. Thank you. This is Bill Leiter again. One of the things that's really onerous about this whole process is the vesting. And projects that are 15, 20, 30 years old are vested under older codes and are still brought forward by developers and owners. One of the things that the city might consider doing is under the next NPDES permit process is to approach ecology and have a sunset clause of 2 years put in from the date of SEPA determination to the start of construction. I think that's more than reasonable that a project should be under construction within 2 years of the NPDES permitted, or the SEPA determination. If after 2 years it's not under construction, then it would be required to update the design to the most current stormwater code. And that's something that might be done.
Thank you, Mr. Leiter.
Okay.
Thank you. So, yeah, thank you for keeping Kenmore in front of them.
All right. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that we'll be meeting tonight, getting council feedback. I'm actually hosting an open house Thursday evening. I've sent out notifications to all the private facility owners, Swamp Creek owners in particular. So hopefully we'll get some folks in and receive some good comments, some good questions, have some discussions Thursday evening. And then we'll take all those comments and feedback and start working on the final draft, which depending on how much feedback and how many comments we get, could be 4 to 6 weeks, and then bring that final draft to council sometime in March, April.
How are we advertising this open house on the 19th?
It's on the webpage, so we put together a little project page for it and put it on the
But are we doing any mailings to the people along Swamp Creek or along some of these areas that flood?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, we sent notification to the Swamp Creek owners in that area, and then
Like 0056, because we've got flooding going there, and we've got other areas where we're getting problems. 0057, I think, is another one that we just got through doing.
I mean, I didn't do a full city mailing, no. Just focused primarily on the kind of the Swamp Creek and drainage policies here.
Yeah, I guess. I think there's been a lot of people with some of the storm events we've had that have been affected by flooding, and this being a surface water management plan for the whole city, that if we could get input, or at least make sure these people understand it, because on there, what's that complex on 72nd Street, Wildcliff Shores, that got hammered with 0057 when 0057 overflowed its banks, and they still, I think, had some problems this spring or this fall with some, after the work was done, they were saying it was still coming up close to them or something. That's why I'm thinking if we could get input and to make sure they're notified, at least
Well, the
they
open
couldn't
house
come back and
is,
say we didn't know about it.
well, the open house is Thursday, and when Richard and I were talking about who do we want to make sure knows about it, I mean, it was my call, and I said, you know, folks in the Swamp Creek watershed, because we've had a big policy conversation and a study and findings. So that is specifically why we chose the Swamp Creek watershed to get mailings, postcards to their house. And then we also chose facility owners because we are changing our policy and how we provide rebates to folks that maintain their facilities. So I guess in my mind, we were focused on where did our significant policy conversation go where there might be changes or something that wasn't expected. So I didn't choose 0056 or 0057, but they're absolutely, Richard can reach out to the Wildcliff Shores folks tomorrow and let them know specifically about the open house on Thursday. If you would like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work that you're doing is really good work, and I would, certainly like to see.
Yeah. There's nothing
some of
in,
the people have been bothered by flooding.
there's nothing in the
doing
surface
something.
water master plan that is going to change how that area looks.
Right.
What we are doing is we're documenting what is city versus private property responsibility, and we consistently behave in a way that will now be better documented.
Which I think is really important to get out there, because there's a lot of times when things are property owners' responsibility that they're coming to us for.
So we're more than happy to reach out to Wildcliff Shores tomorrow, but we don't have the time to drop a postcard for anybody else.
You just know as well as I do. People say, I never heard about it.
So now I open it up to just any questions, comments, feedback council has at this point.
Yeah, I had a question on Appendix D, page 7 of 14. There's a map there with purple and orange pieces of property that are COK facilities old. And gosh, it's a lot of the area within the city, and it includes private property. Are these drainage ponds or vaults or so on for various developments? That it's on page 130 of 176 of the attachment A, I guess it is, or 1.
I apologize, I'm just getting to it, and I can open it up.
But I think I understand that when a development goes in and they put in a retention pond, they invest in the facility, and then is it our responsibility to maintain it after that?
Okay, so you're looking in the Appendix D, the retrofit memorandum, about aged public facilities that will need to be repaired?
Let me go back to the beginning of this.
Can you find that?
Sure, let me just go to...
Stormwater retrofit memorandum. And that's I don't know, it was page 14 of 7 of 14. 130 out of 176, which is the total.
Appendix D, D
Appendix
is in
D.
dog.
Yeah.
You're in E.
Oh, I thought- did you say page 140 of 176?
130 of 176. And there's a similar map that's retrofit projects, new treated, built out, untreated, built out, old facilities. That's the next map. But what's our role in all those? Like on page 130, they're purple and gold or orange
Okay.
properties.
So in this section, what's being highlighted is just like when we talk about private drainage facilities, public drainage facilities have been designed and constructed over a wide range of standards as well, with many of them also going back to the 70s, 80s. And what we tried to do during this plan was kind of evaluate where more effective standards have been used, where they are, and then identify those areas that have facilities or no facilities, and therefore we're not getting very much stormwater treatment in those areas. And once that development's been built and that public right-of-way is now the city's responsibility, those tracks, if there were drainage facilities were transferred to the city, then yes, that would then be become the city responsibility to maintain those facilities, and then when they do fail, we would need to do the repairs or potentially expand those facilities.
So Richard, if you have a neighborhood up here that is completely gold colored, does that mean that it has old stormwater pipes in the right-of-way? So there is some sort of stormwater infrastructure in our right-of-way.
Specifically flow control or water quality facilities. So for instance, North Lake Heights, that big gold area up here, it's an older neighborhood, and you can see how large of an area that is, and I believe the flow control facility there is just like, some 24-inch pipes that hold some water.
That's North Shore Summit, a relatively new area.
North Lake Heights.
The open area on the far
North Shore
side of
Summit.
it is our North Shore Summit Park, on the left side of it, and the west side of it.
And what was your question about North Shore Summit?
Well, that's the gold area you're just pointing to, and it's not an old area. It's relatively new.
Well, the facility's older.
20 years, huh?
The facility's older, so the standards used in those drainage facilities are, by today's standards, they're very substandard. So that's what the goal just identifies, those facilities that are aging and
okay. Now, to the west of there is the Up Lake area, and there's very little gold in there. Who maintains all the storm drains over there?
Well, if there's no gold or purple, that means there's nothing at all. It's just flowing from the road to whatever the nearest stream is.
Down the ditches on the sides of the road.
That's correct.
Okay.
So those would be areas that could benefit greatly from any kind of surface water facility retrofit.
Gotcha. Okay, I see. Because my property is just south of there, and I'm not gold or purple. And yeah, there's a lot of water that runs off the city road up above me onto my property.
So what this section, again, tries to identify is looking at those areas that are going to receive the maximum benefit from either retrofitting an existing older facility to increase treatment of the stormwater, or potentially find those areas that don't have any treatment at all and construct something there so that we can start getting some treatment.
Gotcha.
Okay. We've talked about it several times, and it's in Richard's report, but we are facing, I think by the end of 2016, we have to update our standards to have low impact development. And that'll be wide-reaching amongst the city. It'll impact Richard's stormwater program, all types of capital projects, private development. And so I think one of the things we wanted to do was look at the city, and I think retrofit is going to be part of our future. That it's, we think there's going to be more grant money in the future for retrofit. And the 185th Street grant was a good example of that. It was money from the state that paid for design only to see if we could find an area of the city where we could get infiltration and do some low-impact development, with the hopes that when low-impact development grant money becomes available, we'll be poised to apply for that project. So I think this was just some work we wanted to do ahead of time to see what the city looked like for future retrofit ideas.
Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Souza.
I have a question regarding swimming pools. Can you tell me what is the rule for people that have swimming pools that either they overflow in heavy rains, and so that there's like a valve or something that overflow like you'd have in a tub that releases, and also with hot tubs and everything, and are they supposed to be tied into the sanitary sewer system, or what? Or can they be discharged in an open ditch? And the reason I ask that is because I'm thinking of one that I know is, and it just seems like not a good discharge location. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me what the rules are, and is there a grandfather clause for something like that, or just anything you can tell me?
Well, you can't grandfather water quality violations. So I mean,
Okay.
any discharge that's not stormwater to the system is a illicit discharge. But we actually have a manual available that swimming pool maintenance is one of the specific items addressed in that, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Manual, which I think is referenced probably a few times throughout here, and also in the illicit discharge detection elimination attachment. That relies heavily on that manual. So, for instance, with swimming pools, it'll talk about ideally, yes, you'd want to have that discharge to sanitary sewer, and then it's kind of like you don't have to really worry about it. Otherwise, it outlines BMPs you can follow to dechlorinate the pool, slowly release the water once it's not creating illicit discharge, so that you're not then creating erosion problems. How to go about doing that, where you can send it to. So that manual actually, pool maintenance, hot tub maintenance, pressure washing, all that kind of stuff would be covered in there.
So when you say ideally it should be, does that mean legally? Or is that, I'm trying to, do you see what I'm saying? If something is not, ideally it should be in the sanitary system, but it's not, does that mean it's out of compliance and is illegal?
Well, if you can follow the other guidelines and discharge the water in a manner where it does not become an illicit discharge, you would be okay. But it could be extremely difficult to, empty a pool out and not at some point have it become an illicit discharge, and where, at that point you would then have a violation and get in trouble for that. So that's why we would say ideally. I go back to kind of the infamous car washing. It's not illegal to wash your car in your driveway. It's illegal if any of the runoff gets into a grate, a ditch, anywhere in the city system. So ideally, it would be wise to go to a car wash. But if you can wash your car in an area that infiltrates in your lawn, none of that water leaves the site, gets into the city's surface water system, you're not breaking any rules. So that's kind of what I mean by ideally versus, if you... Some money. Someone may have a swimming pool on 5 acres of forest and with a little depression where that they can slowly release dechlorinated water and not causing any issues. But if you have a swimming pool in a dense neighborhood where are you going to send that water where it's not going to become an illicit discharge?
Right.
So it's really case by case.
Okay.
And part of Richard's responsibility and part of our NPDES requirement is we're expected to look for what's called, that's an illicit discharge. We are expected to look for those, and when we find them, I think we're legally expected to deal with them. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Sure. Our NPDES permit is essentially, it's a stormwater discharge permit that allows us to discharge stormwater and potentially pollutants into waters of the state as long as we follow 200 pages of criteria. And if someone, if someone is, lots of people discharge into our system, and one of those requirements is that we're always if we notice illicit discharges or illicit connections, there are notification requirements that we have to tell ecology. There's timelines that we have to follow to make sure that that discharge and connection are stopped or removed. We have to provide education, technical assistance. If that's not working, we're required to go after them and as a code violation issue. Yeah.
One thing that also comes up is on capital projects. When we redo stormwater systems, this is something we could find on 522 when we start doing that project. When we dig up stormwater lines, we find illicit discharge connections are not uncommon. And we actually have to tell the property owner, you can't have this connection. And when we put our new stormwater system, we can't give you a connection back, and we don't fix this for you. There was a large property on the Aurora project that had drained a whole lot of water for 40 years. And when we were digging, we found an illicit discharge and had to not put it back. So it's kind of, this illicit discharge crops up in a lot of different facets of the work that we do.
And I think more often than not, it's not something malicious. I've found pipe, after a lot of investigation, and it ended up being the floor drain in someone's laundry room that had just been dumping there for 20 years, and they had no idea. They're the third owner of this house, and and then you just need to do what you can to fix those.
Yep. Great.
Any other questions?
Nope.
I had one other. You're getting to the combined sewer overflows, and I understand we have one down at down Log Boom Park, where it is a combined sewer overflow. There are lots of them, or a number of them around the Seattle area, because the sewer systems were combined in the old days. I don't think we have much, if any, combined sewer systems, storm sewer and sanitary sewer combined in the city of Kenmore. Do we? And if so, where? And
there are none that I'm aware of, nor at Log Boom Park. If there is one, I'm not aware of that either.
It's an overflow for the whole greater system, I think. There's a pump station down there, there's a pump station down at Log Boom Park, right there by our playground.
There's a pump station, yeah, for sewer only. I don't believe any of our system would overflow into it.
Yeah, our system, yeah. But it is an overflow. If stormwater gets into the sanitary system and overwhelms it, then it has to go someplace. And that's what those overflows are, the combined sewer overflows. And the whole King County sewer system, Brightwater and so on, the water quality system, has invested heavily in combined sewer overflow retention vaults all around, so that they're not, when there is a big storm that overwhelms the sanitary system, that they're not dumping raw sewage out into the waters of Lake Washington and Puget Sound. And many older cities are really troubled by this, in Philadelphia and Chicago and so on. And big storms in Chicago, all the rivers turn brown. It's a mess, yeah. And fortunately, we're a new enough community here that we don't have combined sanitary and stormwater system. It's supposed to be separated, but you say there are illicit connections which should be going to the sanitary sewer are going into the storm sewer system. And when you uncover those, you have to correct it, but it's not a common thing.
And in my experience, it's not ever been sewage. It's been swimming pools, it's been downspouts, or it's been water from washing, well, I guess water from a washing machine would, but I've not ever found toilets or those type of illicit discharges to a stormwater system.
But some communities are really troubled with that. They have to deal with it. And to repipe the whole city of Seattle, for example, is far more expensive than putting in retention vaults that'll collect the extra flow and then pump it back into the sanitary sewer system to be treated before it gets into, after the storm subsides. And the
But
massive flow.
like Richard said, we're not aware of where we have any combined sewer issues.
Yeah, no, I don't think we do. Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, it's a very complete report, and boy, I've flipped through it pretty quickly and read some of it, but as you say, if 8 hours if you're a fast reader, I think.
Could be.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff report. Mr. Kurlindsey, have anything tonight?
I don't think so.
Light night. Okay. Council member reports and comments. Council member Danuski.
Nothing.
Council member Smith.
Can I ask? Actually, I have nothing to add. I'll talk to the city manager later.
Okay. Council member Sperry.
Nothing at this time.
Council member Curtis.
Nothing.
Council member Herbig.
Nothing.
And I have nothing to add today. So with that, council meeting's adjourned.